My name is Jake, and I've been a night security guard at the old commercial building downtown for the past 2 years. I chose this job out of necessity, having left behind a career that didn't quite pan out. My nights are filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echoes of a once bustling space, now eerily quiet. As I sit in the cramped security office, the glow of multiple monitors reflects off the dull walls, casting flickering shadows. Each screen displays a different angle of the empty hallways and vacant offices. Sometimes, I feel like a ghost myself, an observer in a world that has forgotten how to live. My only companion during these long hours is Alex, my colleague, who works the shift alongside me. We share stories to lighten the mood, talking about everything from our favorite movies to our dreams of the future. But as the clock ticks past midnight, our conversations inevitably drift toward the strange happenings that sometimes occur in this building. I've heard the tales, whispers of the past, echoes of tragedy that linger in the walls, but I've always brushed them off as urban legends. Tonight, though, feels different. There's a heaviness in the air, a weight that presses down on me as I glance at the monitors. The familiar sounds of the building seem amplified, and I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone. As the first hints of unease creep in, I tell myself it's just another night. Little did I know, the shadows were beginning to stir, eager to reveal their secrets. The hours dragged on, and the monotony of the night began to weigh heavily on me. Alex and I settled into our usual routine, exchanging jokes and keeping an eye on the monitors. But as the night deepened, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was off. It started subtly, a flicker on one of the screens, a quick movement in the corner of my eye. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to my tired mind playing tricks on me. But then it happened again. I leaned closer to the monitor displaying the third floor, the grainy image showing nothing but an empty corridor bathed in pale light. Yet, there was something unsettling about the way the shadows danced, almost as if they were alive. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex, engrossed in his own thoughts, glanced at me with raised eyebrows. "See what?" he replied, turning to face the screens. "It's just the cameras glitching again. They do that sometimes." But I wasn't so sure. My heart raced as I pointed to the monitor. "Look there." Something moved. He squinted, leaning in, but all he could see was the empty hallway. "Jake, it's just your imagination. You've been here too long. Maybe you should take a break." I shook my head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I know what I saw, Alex. It was there. It looked like someone was walking." Alex chuckled nervously, trying to ease the tension. "It's probably just a reflection or the wind. Buildings like this creak and groan at night." But deep down, I felt a chill settle in the pit of my stomach. Dismissing it as a simple malfunction didn't seem plausible anymore. As we continued our watch, the feeling of being observed grew stronger, creeping in like a shadow lurking just out of sight. Then came the sounds. Faint, echoing whispers floated through the air, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. I turned to Alex, my heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" He nodded slowly, his smile fading. "Yeah, I did. It's probably just the building settling, right?" But as I sat there, the whispers persisted, wrapping around us like a cold fog, deepening my unease. Something was wrong, very wrong. And whatever it was just getting started. The uneasy atmosphere clung to us as we exchanged nervous glances, the whispers echoing in my mind. I felt compelled to investigate, to dispel the tension that had begun to weave itself into the very fabric of the night. "Let's check it out," I suggested, trying to mask my apprehension with bravado. Alex hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face, but ultimately nodded. Armed with flashlights, we made our way through the dimly lit halls. The cold air brushed against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting ominous shadows that danced along the walls, as if the building itself were alive and watching us. As we ascended to the third floor, I felt a strange sensation in the pit of my stomach, a mix of excitement and dread. The corridor stretched out before us, empty and silent, but something felt different this time. The air was thick, charged with an electric tension. "Did you hear that?" Alex whispered, stopping in his tracks. I strained my ears, and for a moment, the whispers seemed to swell, just out of reach, taunting us. I shined my flashlight into the darkness, illuminating the peeling paint and dust-covered furniture. The beam flickered across a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. "Let's check in there," I urged, moving cautiously toward the door. As we approached, the whispers grew louder, coiling around us like a serpent. My heart raced, but curiosity drove me forward. I pushed the door open, revealing a room frozen in time, filled with forgotten relics of the past. Old desks, yellowing papers, and a thick layer of dust that seemed to muffle the very air. "What is this place?" Alex breathed, stepping inside. I scanned the room, my flashlight dancing over the surfaces. "Looks like an old office. It hasn't been touched in years." As I stepped further in, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a presence lurking just beyond my line of sight. Something was watching us. "We need to find out what's going on," I said, forcing my voice to steady. Together, we began sifting through the remnants of the room, unaware that we were unearthing more than just old papers. The building's secrets were stirring, and we were only beginning to scratch the surface. As I rummaged through the clutter, my fingers brushed against a dusty diary wedged between two ancient file cabinets. The leather cover was cracked and worn, and as I opened it, the pages emitted a musty odor that seemed to hold the weight of time. My heart raced as I began to read, the scrawled handwriting revealing a hidden history of the building. "Jake, look at this," Alex called, his voice echoing in the stillness. He had uncovered a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, detailing a mysterious disappearance that had taken place decades ago. The headline read, "Local woman vanishes without a trace." A photograph of a smiling young woman accompanied the article, her eyes seeming to follow us. "This is creepy," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's connected to what we've been experiencing?" I continued to flip through the diary, the entries growing darker with each page. The writer spoke of strange noises, flickering lights, and a presence that felt suffocating. The final entry sent chills down my spine. "I fear for my life. I believe it watches me, waiting for something. I must leave before it's too late." The date on the entry was the same year the woman had disappeared. "We need to leave," I said, my pulse quickening. "This is getting too weird." But as I looked up, Alex was staring past me, his face pale. "Jake, behind you!" I spun around, my flashlight illuminating the room's corners. Nothing was there, but the air felt charged with a malevolence that made my skin crawl. "There's nothing here," I said, trying to reassure both him and myself. "Let's just get out of here," Alex insisted, backing toward the door. I nodded, the diary slipping from my fingers and falling to the floor as I moved to follow him. Just then, a loud bang echoed through the building, reverberating off the walls like thunder. It sounded like a door slamming shut somewhere below us. My heart raced as I glanced at Alex, who looked just as frightened as I felt. "We should check it out," I suggested, though doubt gnawed at me. As we stepped out of the room, the whispers returned, wrapping around us once more. The weight of the building felt heavier, the darkness closing in. Whatever secrets lay hidden here were desperate to be uncovered, and it seemed they were not ready to let us leave just yet. With our hearts pounding, we descended the stairwell toward the sound of the slamming door. Each step echoed like a drumbeat of impending doom, and the whispers grew louder, swirling around us, fueling our anxiety. I glanced at Alex, whose face was ashen, fear radiating off him like heat. "Are you sure we should be doing this?" he asked, hesitating at the top of the stairs. "We have to know what's going on," I replied, though I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. "If there's something in this building, we can't just ignore it." As we reached the ground floor, The corridor stretched out before us, shrouded in shadows. The dim lights flickered ominously, casting long, distorted shapes that danced across the walls. My flashlight beam swept across the area, landing on the heavy steel door at the far end of the hall, the one that led to the basement. "Is that where the noise came from?" Alex whispered, eyeing the door warily. "I think so," I said, feeling an involuntary shiver race down my spine. "Let's check it out." We approached the door, the air growing colder with every step. I placed my hand on the handle, my pulse racing in anticipation. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open, revealing a dark abyss beyond. The smell of dampness and decay hit us like a wall, and I flicked on my flashlight, illuminating the narrow staircase that descended into darkness. "Do we really have to go down there?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. I hesitated, but something inside me urged me onward. "We need to face this. We can't let fear control us." With a reluctant nod, we stepped inside, the door creaking ominously as it swung shut behind us. The stairs felt endless, each step echoing in the silence. As we descended, a sense of dread enveloped us, tightening its grip with every inch we descended. At the bottom, we emerged into a large room filled with old machinery and broken furniture, remnants of a forgotten past. But it was the shadow that caught my eye, a dark figure standing at the far end of the room, partially obscured by the dim light. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steady despite the rising panic in my chest. The figure turned slowly, revealing nothing but an inky blackness where its face should be. The air crackled with an unearthly energy, and I felt a surge of terror rush through me. "It's watching us," I whispered, backing away slowly. Then came the whispers, louder and more frantic, filling the air with a chorus of lost souls. In that moment I knew we were not alone. The entity had revealed itself, and we were about to confront the darkness that had haunted this place for far too long. Panic surged through me as I felt the weight of the entity's gaze pressing down. I grabbed Alex's arm, urging him to move. "We need to get out of here," I shouted, my voice strained against the cacophony of whispers. Without hesitation, we turned and bolted back toward the staircase, adrenaline fueling our flight. The darkness seemed to close in around us, the shadows elongating and warping as we ascended, as if the building itself were conspiring to trap us. The whispers morphed into a deafening roar, echoing our fear and desperation. As we reached the door at the top of the stairs, it slammed shut with a resounding bang. I fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Come on," I shouted, panic clawing at my throat. Alex pounded on the door, desperation mingling with fear. "Let us out, please." Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the corridor, extinguishing the flickering lights. The room was plunged into darkness. I felt a shiver race down my spine as the whispers intensified, swirling around us like a storm. "Jake," Alex cried, his voice laced with terror. "What do we do?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think. "We have to push it open together. On 3. "Okay," he agreed, his voice shaky. 1, 2, 3. We shoved against the door with all our strength, and to my shock, it flew open, sending us tumbling into the corridor. We scrambled to our feet, urgency fueling our movements as we sprinted toward the exit. As we raced through the building, the whispers began to fade, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly with each step we took. But I could feel the entity behind us, a dark presence chasing us, refusing to let go. Bursting through the front door, we stumbled into the cool night air, gasping for breath. We had escaped, but the haunting echoes of the building lingered in my mind. Whatever had watched us from the shadows would never truly let us go. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the terror we had just endured. I stood outside the building, my heart still racing, trying to process what had happened. Alex leaned against the cold stone wall, his face pale, and I could see the tremor in his hands. "We made it," he said softly, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "Yeah," I replied, though the weight of our experience pressed heavily on my chest. I glanced back at the old building, its windows glinting in the morning light. It looked so innocent now, but I knew better. The whispers still echoed in my mind, reminding me that the darkness could resurface at any moment. I could feel its lingering presence, a chilling reminder that some secrets are never truly buried. As I walked away, I realized that the shadows of that night would follow me long after the sun had risen. I never imagined working night shifts in a warehouse would be anything other than dull. It was routine. I was used to the dim lights, the long hours of silence, and the monotonous task of inventory checks. My job was simple: show up, make sure nothing went wrong, and leave. It paid the bills and gave me enough time to think, though I often wondered if that much thinking was a good thing. My friend Mark worked alongside me. He was a bit more paranoid than I was. He would always joke about the strange things that happened during the night, but I never paid much attention. Tonight felt no different. The air inside the warehouse was cold, a result of the air conditioning that never seemed to turn off. The rows of shelves stretched on endlessly, casting long shadows that danced under the flickering neon lights. It was just another shift, or so I thought. As we started our rounds, Mark pointed out something odd. "Hey, did you notice this?" he asked, holding up a clipboard. "The inventory numbers are off. We should have 6 boxes of electronics in aisle 4, but there are only 4. I shrugged it off. "Probably just a mistake in the system. Happens all the time." Mark frowned, unconvinced. "I don't know, man. I double-checked the records. This doesn't add up." We continued checking the aisles, but the missing items weren't just limited to the electronics. Other sections showed similar discrepancies. Small things, boxes of supplies, equipment, had disappeared without a trace. We joked that maybe someone was taking souvenirs, but the air felt heavier, like something was watching us from between the shelves. As the night progressed, I noticed it too. Small details. The doors that should have been locked were slightly ajar. Items that had been in one place earlier seemed to have shifted. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I wasn't sure if my mind was playing tricks on me. But by the 3rd or 4th time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was definitely off. Mark's unease was starting to rub off on me. He had this way of getting under your skin, especially when he was nervous. As we continued our rounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the warehouse. The silence between the aisles had shifted, becoming more oppressive. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed fainter, as if something was absorbing the sound. "Do you hear that?" Mark whispered, his eyes darting toward the back of the warehouse. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was the distant creaking of metal shelving. "I don't hear anything, man," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. We carried on, marking down items, but with each step, the strange occurrences seemed to increase. At one point, I swore I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Just a flicker, a shadow sliding between the racks. But when I turned, nothing was there. I told myself it was just the dim lights messing with my vision, but my gut was telling me something else. Mark, meanwhile, was getting more and more jumpy. "This isn't right," he muttered. "Something's going on here. It's not just the inventory." "Calm down," I said, though I wasn't feeling calm myself. "We'll finish our checks, report the missing stuff, and be out of here in no time." But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. There was a tension building, something invisible pressing down on us. The missing items were only the beginning. Something much bigger was hiding in the shadows, and it was starting to notice us. And for the first time that night, I began to wonder if we would make it through this shift unscathed. It wasn't long before the unease that had been creeping up on us turned into outright fear. The strange occurrences we had been brushing off were no longer subtle. As we made our way to the back of the warehouse, the lights began to flicker erratically, plunging us into brief moments of total darkness. "Okay, this is getting out of hand," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe we should call it in, get someone else to check the system." But before Mark could respond, a loud crash echoed through the aisles. The sound reverberated off the metal racks, making it impossible to pinpoint where it came from. We froze, our flashlights sweeping across the shelves. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but there was a chill in the air now that hadn't been there before. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. I could hear the panic rising in his throat. I was about to agree when I saw it. A shadow, moving between the shelves, darting just outside the beam of my flashlight. It was fast, too fast. I swallowed hard, refusing to believe what I had just seen. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mark nodded, his eyes wide. "We need to move." We hurried through the maze of aisles, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. There were no footsteps behind us, no sounds to give away its presence, but we both knew something was following us. I could feel it, like a pressure in the air, something cold and heavy. It was as if the shadows themselves were shifting, coming alive around us. Suddenly, the lights flickered once more, and in that brief flash of darkness, I felt a cold breath against my neck. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing, except the unmistakable sense that we were not alone anymore. Panic was starting to settle in, and I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my mind. The warehouse, which had once felt like a familiar, albeit eerie, place, now seemed like a maze designed to trap us. Every corner we turned felt like it brought us deeper into something we couldn't explain. Mark's breathing was ragged as we moved, our flashlights darting from shelf to shelf, trying to find some semblance of an exit. "We need to get out of here," he kept repeating, his voice shaky. But every door we tried was locked. Every pathway seemed to lead us back to the same aisles we'd already covered. It was like the warehouse itself had changed, twisting in ways that defied logic. The temperature was dropping. I could see my breath hanging in the air now, white puffs that felt out of place in the normally stuffy atmosphere. Whatever this thing was, it was getting closer, feeding off our fear, and we were giving it plenty to thrive on. I stopped at one point, my heart pounding in my chest. We need to think. Panicking isn't going to help us. But even as I said the words, I could feel my own fear building. The shadows were alive, moving, and there was no rational explanation that could calm me anymore. "Think. Are you serious?" Mark snapped, his eyes wide with terror. "We're being hunted, and you want to think?" Before I could respond, we heard it again, a faint whisper, coming from somewhere deep in the warehouse. It was unintelligible, but the sound made my blood run cold. There was no one else here, but the voice was unmistakable. Something was with us, and it was no longer content to stay hidden. As the whispers grew louder, I realized we couldn't keep running. We needed to figure out what was happening, or we'd never make it out. I pulled Mark aside, forcing him to stop and catch his breath. His eyes were wild with panic, but I couldn't let him spiral out of control. "Not yet." "Listen," I said, trying to sound calm even though my heart was hammering in my chest. "This thing, it's playing with us." "But why? What does it want?" Mark shook his head, his voice trembling. "I don't know, man. I don't know. We need to get out of here." Desperate for answers, I remembered something. An old story the night shift workers used to tell, a half-forgotten legend about a security guard who disappeared years ago. At the time, I thought it was nothing more than a ghost story, something they told to scare new hires. But now, standing in the middle of this nightmare, the story didn't seem so far-fetched. "Mark," I said, my voice low. "Do you remember the story about the guard? The one who vanished?" Mark blinked, his fear momentarily replaced by confusion. "Yeah, but that's just a rumor, right?" I wasn't so sure anymore. The whispers, the cold, the way the warehouse seemed to change around us, it all felt too intentional. It wasn't just random chaos. It was like someone or something was controlling it. "We need to find out where that guard disappeared," I said, gripping Mark's arm. "If we're going to survive this, we have to understand what we're up against." Mark hesitated, but the fear of staying still outweighed his doubts. Together, we moved deeper into the warehouse, toward the place where the legend said the guard was last seen. We reached the farthest corner of the warehouse, the section that hadn't been touched in years. Dust coated the shelves, and the air was thick with a staleness that made it hard to breathe. It was quiet here, too quiet. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade, leaving us in near silence, broken only by the sound of our footsteps echoing in the stillness. "This is it," I muttered. I didn't know how I was so sure, but I could feel it. Whatever was haunting us, whatever was feeding off our fear, this was its home. Mark's flashlight flickered, and then the beam went out completely, plunging us into darkness. "No, no, no," he stammered, shaking it as if that would somehow bring the light back. I raised my own light, sweeping it across the aisles. And that's when I saw it. A figure, barely more than a shadow, standing at the end of the row. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its presence, oppressive and cold, seeping into the air around us. "We have to face it," I whispered, though every part of me wanted to run. As we stood frozen, the figure began to move, gliding toward us with an unnatural speed. My heart pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay still. We couldn't outrun it. Not anymore. With a shaky breath, I reached for the matches in my pocket. If we couldn't escape, we would burn this place down and end whatever curse had been left behind. The figure was almost upon us, and I could feel the cold radiating from it, seeping into my bones. My hands shook as I fumbled with the matches, but I managed to strike one. The small flame flickered weakly in the dark, casting long shadows on the towering shelves around us. "Now," I shouted to Mark, my voice barely more than a croak. He nodded, understanding what needed to be done. Without hesitation, we kicked over a stack of old cardboard boxes, spilling their contents onto the floor. I tossed the match onto the pile, and the fire ignited almost instantly, the flames quickly catching onto the dry, dusty debris that had been left to rot for years. The figure paused for a moment, as if confused by our sudden act of defiance. The fire spread quickly, licking up the shelves, consuming everything in its path. The heat was intense, and the light from the flames cast the warehouse in a chaotic glow. For a moment, I thought we had won. The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering in the heat. But then it started moving again, faster this time, rushing toward us with a force that made my breath catch in my throat. I grabbed Mark by the arm, dragging him toward the exit. The warehouse was a maze of smoke and fire now, and I could barely see 2 feet in front of me. But we ran, desperate to escape the nightmare that had consumed the warehouse, and us. As we burst through the exit, coughing and gasping for air, I looked back. The warehouse was engulfed in flames, the shadowy figure no longer visible. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly gone. Not yet. My name is Matt, and for a few years now, I've been working as a delivery driver. It wasn't what I had planned for my life, but things don't always go as we expect. The night shifts helped me pay the bills, and most of the time, it was pretty quiet, except for the deserted roads and the occasional unusual customers that popped up now and then. But nothing compared to that night. I was with Dylan, my best friend and delivery partner. The night was eerily quiet, with no sound of crickets or any other typical countryside noise. We were both making a delivery to a rural area I had never visited before. The GPS pointed to a spot right in the middle of nowhere, and as we drove down the dark roads, I started to feel a growing sense of unease. When we finally arrived, what we saw was an old, seemingly abandoned house. The windows were broken, the wood on the walls looked rotten, and the air around had a strange smell, something that reminded me of rusted metal mixed with dampness. "Is this the place?" Dylan asked, glancing at his phone screen, confused. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to continue. We had received a message with clear instructions to leave the delivery on the porch. There were no lights, no sign of life in that house. "Let's just drop the box and get out of here," I said, hoping Dylan would agree. But instead, he smiled. "Man, this is way too weird. Let's check it out." That decision unsettled me, but before I could protest, Dylan was already stepping out of the van. And, of course, I followed him. Dylan had always been like that, overly curious. I, on the other hand, preferred to finish the job and move on, but at that moment, something about that house intrigued me, even though my instincts were screaming at me to run. As soon as we stepped onto the porch, the old wood creaked beneath our feet. The silence around us felt heavier, almost tangible. "Look at this," Dylan whispered, pointing to one of the windows. It was broken, but the glass was scattered outside, as if something had forced its way out of the house, rather than someone trying to break in. "Doesn't that seem strange to you?" I just nodded. The truth was, everything there felt off, but what bothered me the most was the feeling in my stomach. It was as if I were being watched. I tried to push the thought away, but with each step I took toward the door, the feeling grew stronger. Dylan crouched down to peek through the keyhole. "The door's not locked," he said, slowly turning the knob with a grin I knew all too well. It was that challenging smile, like he wanted to prove he wasn't afraid of anything. Before I could suggest that we leave the box and get out of there, the door creaked open with a sharp screech. The smell that wafted out made me step back. It was a mix of mold, dust, and something else. Something I couldn't identify, but it made my skin crawl. "I can't believe you're actually going in there," I muttered, but Dylan had already taken his first steps inside. And then, I had no choice. I followed him, trying to ignore the growing weight of that house pressing down on us. It was dark, and only the faint light from our phones lit the path ahead. Whatever was waiting for us, I knew it wouldn't be anything good. Entering that house felt like crossing an invisible barrier that separated the ordinary world from something far more unsettling. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the silence inside was absolute, except for the muffled sound of our footsteps on the wooden floor. The walls were covered in dust and cobwebs, but what disturbed me the most were the scattered objects all around. There were old furniture pieces, rocking chairs, and bookshelves filled with torn, dusty books, but everything seemed out of place, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. "Look at this," Dylan murmured, pointing to a shelf. On it was a collection of porcelain dolls, all lined up, their faces turned in opposite directions. Each one appeared deformed in some way. One was missing an eye, another had a cracked head. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "Let's just drop the box and get out of here," I suggested, but Dylan was absorbed by the environment. He ran his hand over one of the pieces of furniture and then looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Don't you feel like you're being watched?" I was about to respond, but something on the wall to our right caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just the faint light from the phone playing tricks with the shadows, but then I realized they were moving, even when we stood still. Everything was wrong. The shadows on the wall didn't match the objects in the room. "Dylan," I murmured, trying to get his attention. "The shadows. They're moving." He turned, the carefree expression disappearing from his face. We stood frozen, watching as the shadows seemed to writhe, stretching, as if they were trying to break free from the walls. Each one had a distorted shape, almost human, but not quite. It was like they were trapped in some macabre dance that we couldn't understand. "We need to get out of here now," I said, my voice thick with urgency. Dylan, finally sensing the danger, nodded, but as we turned toward the door, the sound of something scraping across the floor echoed behind us. The air grew even heavier. Whatever was in that house definitely didn't want us to leave. My instincts were screaming to run, but something kept us there. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear. When the scratching sounds continued, I slowly turned, only to see the shadows distorting even further, as if they were trying to get closer to us. Dylan, for a moment, froze, his eyes locked on that bizarre scene. "Matt, this is..." he began, but couldn't finish. We knew what it meant. We weren't alone. And, even worse, we didn't know what was watching us. We started walking deeper into the house, though every fiber of my being screamed to do the opposite. We passed through another room, this one smaller and filled with even more unsettling objects. In the corner, there was an old bookshelf covered in dust, and in the center of the room, a table with melted candles, as if they had been used recently. The smell of burnt wax still lingered in the air. "Look at this," Dylan whispered, picking up one of the books from the shelf. He opened it carefully, and what we saw sent a deep chill through me. The book was filled with strange symbols and grotesque drawings, human figures being sacrificed in macabre rituals. "This is no ordinary place," I said quietly, trying to process what was in front of us. "It looks like a cult." Dylan flipped through the pages quickly, his expression growing more tense with each turn. They were trying to summon something ancient. As he read a few passages aloud, the house seemed to react. A cold wind swept through the room, snuffing out the few remaining candles. The shadows on the walls stirred violently, as if they were being awakened by those words. "Stop reading that!" I almost shouted, feeling panic rise within me. Dylan snapped the book shut, but the damage had already been done. The temperature plummeted, and suddenly, the door we had entered through slammed shut with a loud bang. We were trapped. The air around us grew heavier, and the shadows began to inch closer, making it clear that we had disturbed something very, very dangerous. I tried to pull the door open with all my strength, but it felt as though it was locked from the inside. Every tug I gave only made the sound echo through the house, as if mocking our desperate attempt to escape. Dylan's breathing grew heavier beside me, and for the first time since we entered, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Matt, what's happening?" This can't be real," he whispered, but we both knew that it was far more real than we wanted it to be. The shadows, once just distorted figures on the walls, now seemed to gain more substance. They began moving toward us, twisting grotesquely, as if they were being drawn to us. The entire house felt alive, and we were the intruders. "We need to find another way out," I said, trying to stay calm. But deep down, I knew there was more to it, something these entities wanted from us. We rushed back to the room with the books, where Dylan frantically started flipping through another volume. "There has to be a way to stop this," he said, turning page after page. "These rituals. Maybe we can undo whatever they started." "Are you crazy? What if that just makes things worse?" I asked, but my own voice trembled with uncertainty. Still, something in the books seemed to hold the key to our survival. Dylan stopped on a specific page. "Here. It says a sacrifice can break the cycle. If we offer something, maybe we can leave." The idea sent a chill through me. Sacrifice? I didn't know exactly what that meant, but the look in Dylan's eyes told me everything. He was willing to do whatever it took to get out, even if it meant risking our lives. Dylan gripped the book tightly, his eyes locked on the words that might be our only chance of escape. I could see the conflict on his face, and for a moment, I thought he was actually going to attempt the ritual. But then he took a deep breath and said, "We can't do this. We don't know what will happen." I silently agreed, relieved. Despite the fear overwhelming us, The thought of performing any sort of macabre ritual was too much to bear. But the problem remained. The shadows were closing in, growing more tangible, more menacing with each passing second. I could feel their cold presence, like they were draining the life from everything around them. The floor began to tremble slightly, and the house seemed to respond to the presence of those entities. With every second that passed, we felt like we were running out of time. Dylan and I exchanged a quick glance, and in that instant, we knew what we had to do. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the shadows. We sprinted through the narrow hallways of the house, the sound of our footsteps echoing like a panic alarm. The maze of rooms and corridors seemed endless, and every time we tried to find an exit, something blocked our way. Doors slammed shut, hallways twisted, and the shadows continued to pursue us relentlessly. Then, as if in response to our desperation, the front door suddenly swung open. The faint moonlight shone through, and without thinking twice, we bolted outside. Only then did I realize how close we had come to the end. We escaped the house, but the sense of relief was fleeting. Deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Something dark had followed us out. We've reached the end. Which story did you find the darkest? Comment below in the comments. Be careful where you walk. Thank you and see you later.